Hey everyone, Model Man Frank here. Welcome to the broadcast. Hope everybody is doing great. Just wanted to welcome you all. If you're watching this on playback, I hope you're able to see everything and see what's going on. And I hope you all had a good weekend. I went flying yesterday and had a good night, and it was always a. Actually, I'm sorry, it was a really good flying day. It really was, and I hope everybody can see what's going on. Again, if you're watching this on playback, make sure you hit the thumbs up button and the like button. The thumbs up button is the like button. Sorry. So yeah, you know what? You're gonna hit the thumbs up button and subscribe, share the video to anybody that wants to learn a little bit about aviation history. Tonight's broadcast is going to be about one aircraft in particular, one that I really like, and it's the 707. I never got to fly on the 707. And I really always wanted to fly in the 707. I like the KC-135. It is a piece of history that is just like no other. It is just one of those airplanes that you look at it and you can see that it came from a time period where everything was changing. So much was changing in aviation at that time period. You know, the war had just ended. Yeah, we were getting into other wars. We had Korea going on. We had Vietnam coming up. But Boeing at that time, they saw a potential. You know, as we spoke about last week, we spoke about the Model 377, right? The 377 didn't do commercially very well. It had to compete. First of all, de Havilland, as we spoke about de Havilland before, had just come out with their aircraft, and things weren't going too well for Comet, for the Comet itself. But you know, Boeing saw something and really wanted to try and sell their product, and they knew that number one, they could sell it to the military. And they had a potential customer in mind, which was Pan Am. And so the company early on was the first to really see and appreciate the potential there. So being that they couldn't get anybody really interested, they decided, you know what, we're going to dump $16 million in it. $16 million back then was $185 million. That's a lot of money for a company like Boeing, and for them to risk it all and to put their own money into their project, they had a lot riding on it. So the Boeing company decided that they were going to go and they were going to put in their $16 million. And in 1952, they started designing this aircraft. Now, what they were thinking is it's going to have 4 engines, and they're also going to design an aircraft that can be used for aerial refueling. They didn't know, because you got to remember, Boeing had they had the Model 377, which was being used as a C-97, and it was being used to refuel what? Jets were flying at the time. It was really hard to fly a C-97 and to keep a jet, to slow the jet down enough just so that, and that C-97 was at full blast, trying to refuel, and a lot of accidents happened during that time period. You know, aerial refueling had just become an infancy thing. So Boeing was they knew something really good was happening. Now, of course, across the ocean, there was something going on with the Comet, and the planes were not doing very well commercially. They were breaking up. There were some problems where the aircraft was just, you know, the plane was falling apart in the air. And a lot of that hurt de Havilland big time. So it wasn't something that, you know, Pan Am really wanted to put their finger on. They really wanted an American company to come in and put in a jet aircraft. So again, they drew everything they had. Boeing went ahead and said, "Listen, let's go ahead and start producing this plane." They designed an aircraft that was going to be a revolutionary plane. In order to make this whole project a secret from anybody, they weren't going to call it the Boeing 707. So they needed something to really kind of throw off insiders in the business and aviation community of what this aircraft was going to actually be. So, what better way to do it? We'll call it the Model 367-80. So, it was also known as the Dash 80 project. The Dash 80 project was going to be first for the military, second for the civilian market. But they had to win the military over first. So, on May 14th, actually, before that, the project was coming together. As you can see here, this is the 707. It hadn't been produced yet, but the Dash 80 was going to be similar to this aircraft. And Boeing really wanted this to really sell. They knew they had a real cool project that was going to be potentially really big for them. And on May 14th, 1954, 2 years, they had just went ahead and they threw it all in there. So they came out with the Dash 80. The plane was an awesome aircraft. It came out with 4 engines. It was a plane that was going to be able to service not only the military, but the public alike. And it was going to be revolutionary. And the government saw something in this plane that they knew, yeah, you know what, we could use something like this and we'll be able to actually... The one thing that Boeing had going for them making this aircraft was that the aircraft was going to be able to keep up with the jet fighters. And that was really important to the military. So that's the Dash 80. The Dash 80 rolled out. And 4 engines. The aircraft came out with JT3s. They were turbofan jet engines. And at first, as you can see in the photo that I'm showing you, this is the Dash 80 the way it was painted. So Tex Johnson was the test pilot for this aircraft. Okay, he was the one that was going to show the world what Boeing had created. So the aircraft went through its training paces and everything like that. There's a famous photo, actually there's a video out, that shows this aircraft, this one, taking off, and you know, the Seattle Air and Sea Show is going on. So Boeing executives are like, you know what? We're going to show off our beautiful brand new airplane, this jet aircraft, this awesome plane. So they have Tex Johnson at the controls, and he's going to fly over the crowd and wow the crowd and show them what America has built. America has entered the jet age. And so Tex Johnson, we're going to do something. He just went ahead and did it. And he took the Dash 80, took it up to altitude, and he went and started doing barrel rolls with the plane. He did a barrel roll right over the venue. Now, granted, all the Boeing executives are watching this like, He rolled the plane all the way across the venue, turned around, and then rolled the aircraft again on the way back. Can you imagine being in the crowd and you're seeing this for the very first time? You're seeing a commercial, potentially a commercial airliner, 4 engines. I mean, you could just imagine, you couldn't really roll a B-17. I mean, you could, but it just wasn't really meant for that. But this jet airliner, oh my God, it rolled over like it was nothing. And, of course, Tex Johnson kept his job. He landed. Boeing executives got very upset at him and told him, don't ever do that again. He's like, I wasn't going to do something if I didn't know that the plane could do it. So the Boeing aircraft was a hit. And the Model 367, or as everybody knew it, was the Dash 80. Something very interesting about this aircraft is that when it came out, it borrowed a lot of tech from aircraft that were already being produced. The B-47, which was Boeing's very first intercontinental jet bomber. It was 4-engined. I'm sorry, it was 2-engined. It was it was 4-engined. It was an airplane that the wing was very slender. It was swept back at 30 degrees, so it was fast, and it had turbofans on it. Yeah, I'm sorry, it had turbojets. Through testing, the aircraft had developed some issues. Especially the military had found that the engine pylons, the pylons that actually held the engine in place on the B-47, the engine would actually rip off in flight. And it wasn't good because it killed a lot of pilots. As the B-47 program continued on with the military, things got better and better. And in those better models that came out, they came out with a better system of keeping that pylon and keeping the motor in place. Better pins. So when the pylon is actually stuck to the engine, it's those engines are stuck in with a series of pins, and the pins are like, I don't know, they're about the size of this cup, and they're solid, and they hold that engine in place. This solid pin is the only thing that's holding the engine in place. But they got better with the technology. So they incorporated that technology into the Dash 80. As you're looking at the photo, as you're seeing now, the engine was slung on the wings. And this was kind of new because no other, the Comet had just coming out. And where were the engines on the Comet? They were stuck inside close to the fuselage. So not only that, it was really loud on the Comet. But they wanted to get away from having the engines so close. They wanted the engines out so the cabin would be much quieter. It would be, you would have more space. Having the engines that close, you had to get away from having so much space in the cabin, and cargo hold was compromised. So the Dash 80, as you see it, came out, rolled out. The military bought many aircraft. They started their testing. They started testing the aircraft for military use as a military plane, as a refueler to refuel their fast-moving jets, and as a cargo plane. The military told Boeing, "We're going to release you to go ahead and produce this as a commercial aircraft." Boeing executives went nuts because they knew they had the potential customer for this aircraft. And their customer, none other, was one of the largest airliners in the world, Pan American Airways. Pan American Airways was their number one thought. And when producing this aircraft, of course, the military, they needed to get military control. So Pan American bought many, many different planes. And Boeing really captured the market that they really wanted with the airplane itself. They saw, not only did they get Boeing, they got TWA, because TWA was already, Pan Am was already buying DC-8s, and Douglas had already brought out their plane as a commercial aircraft. So the Douglas DC-8 was already in the market, but Pan Am wanted the 707 because you could actually sit passengers three abreast. So it was three on one side and three on the other. So 6 passengers all the way across. And that was a big, big selling point. You could actually fit more passengers on the aircraft. Okay. So passengers. Also, when Boeing went to go ahead and design the aircraft for Boeing, when Boeing designed the aircraft for Pan Am and started to develop it as a passenger aircraft, they had to change the body. So the body had to be, on the Dash 80, the body was a little narrow, okay? To be able to fit the 3-3 configuration, 6 passengers abreast, they had to round out the fuselage. So they had to go from very tight to very round. And they did that with the 707. So when the 707 came out, TWA was going to be the first person to get their aircraft. But, I'm sorry, it was Pan Am that got their first planes. So, this is the best way to really see how the plane sat up. And that cross section that you see right here, you can see that the wing is out, and then you got the 4 engines, 1, 2 on one side, 2 on the other. The cabin is very large, but the wings are swept back. So instead of they weren't swept back as a B-47. They were brought forward a little bit more than the B-47. So the wing sweep on this aircraft was 30 degrees. On the B-47, it was 35 degrees. So it was little bit of a difference there. The 707 came out and started flying with Pan American. And it was a major hit. Out of all the aircraft that Boeing sold, the 707 was a very successful product. Something that you probably never knew, but the Boeing 707 was in production from 1954, all the way up until the 2000s. The last one rolled off the assembly line, and is still flying today. The aircraft went through various numbers of changes. It changed engines, and it changed a little bit in different configurations. Now, good afternoon, PB. Colin, just to say hello to everybody. I'm sorry I didn't really say hi to everybody. Colin, welcome to the show. The Roots of E, welcome to the show. And PP, good afternoon also. I'm sure it's probably afternoon where you're at. Um, I get very passionate about talking to you guys about these airplanes. So I jumped right into the show for the aircraft that we're watching here. So no time was lost in developing the aircraft from the Dash 80 to the 707. Pan American got theirs, TWA got theirs, United, Continental, Braniff bought 707s, British Overseas Airways, which later on became BOAC, became British Airways. So British Airways, which later became British Airways, moved away from buying Comets, which was a big whoa, to buying the Boeing 707. In 1958, the Boeing 707 flew from New York to London. And that was Pan Am cemented the Boeing 707 in its legacy. Now, there's a lot of things that you can look at the 707 and find a lot of design cues in the modern aircraft that are flying in our skies today. I'm sure when you look at this diagram in front of us, you can see a lot of those design cues in planes that are flying around. Airbus, you see a lot of things that Airbus incorporated in their plane. They took those design cues from this aircraft, from this plane. And the 707 cemented. There's a, if you go online, you could probably find it. The first airport movie had Dean Martin in it. And they actually, the 707 was the star of the show. It makes a, I don't know if it's American or United, but Dean Martin's in the movie and they're showing the 707. The 707 stuck in the snow. So, the airport's closed because of this 707. So, you may want to look that up and watch that movie. The 707 was in the movies a lot. If you ever watched the movie Bullet, you can actually see the 707s taken off in one of the scenes. There's a lot of movies from the 60s and 70s that you can watch, and you'll be able to actually see the Model 367, which later became the 707. So, the 707-120, okay, was the very first one that came out with the turbofan. So, Boeing was building the aircraft with the turbofan, and the turbojet was the very first ones. That was the first plane that actually came out. Elvis purchased the 707. Whoa. Sorry, I saw that pop up, and I didn't even know. That's pretty funny. I never even knew Elvis owned the 707. I do know there's one of the famous people out there that owns a 707 and is still flying his 707 today, is Mr. John Travolta. He actually has his 707. He has a 720, I'm sorry, parked in front of his home in Florida. The 707 went through some engine changes. Now, I'm going to bring in a photo here that's going to cover my face, but you're going to be able to see the differences in the engines. So the early JT4s that had it didn't have a bypass. So later models of the 707 came out with a JT3D, which was a low bypass turbofan. It was a little bit quieter also. It didn't burn as much oil, and it didn't smoke as much. The old JT4A turbojets turned the plane into a chimney. I mean, when the plane took off, it looked like the plane was on fire, really. Um, if you watch any of the old movies, you could actually see the DC-8 taking off, and then you would see the 707 take off. All those planes had the turbojet engines on. When the turbofans came on with the later JT3Ds came in, and they had that bypass, it made the engine smoke less. So fuel economy was picked up. Later on in life, then the Dash 80, which also became the KC-135, also put on turbofans, very large jet fans that you see on like 737, 777s, and a lot of the aircraft that we see now today. And they had those airplanes. But the 707s that are flying, they're flying with the JT3Ds. So the 707 went from a passenger to a freightliner. Pan Am used them. DHL, a lot of the freight companies used them. Amerijet. Avianca was flying them on their New York to Columbia routes. Varig bought them. Olympic Aviation bought them. TWA, Delta Airlines. But there was a competitor to the 707, which was the DC-8, Douglas. And kind of funny enough, Douglas Aviation, which later became McDonnell Douglas, later on got bought out by Boeing. So if you can't beat them, buy them out. So they did. So 707 kept rolling out, but they wanted to come out with another product. You can only do so much to the 707, but you needed to have more of a niche market. So the 707 was a niche market type of aircraft, and Boeing wanted to get more of that kind of like short haul market. The 707 was a long haul aircraft. It could go from New York to LA, LA to Honolulu, Honolulu to Tokyo. Those were the long haul. You couldn't really do short haul, and we were still a little bit of ways from development of the 737. So the 707 wasn't really an aircraft made for short haul flights. So Boeing decided we're going to come out with the Model 720. The Model 720, as you can see here, was smaller than the 707. And it was an airplane that fit that niche market, the small haul flights. New York to Florida, Florida to all of the Caribbean. You were still flying propeller-driven aircraft at that time. DC-3s were still flying, DC-4s, DC-6s, DC-7s were still flying. So propeller-driven aircraft were still on the way, but the 720 filled in that niche. They still wanted a little bit of a jet travel. The 720 didn't do very well. Commercially for Pan Am, they only bought a very few number of the aircraft. Northwest Airlines bought it, used it on small hauls. It really just didn't do well commercially. It didn't last very long. Probably by the 1970s, they were already pretty much, they had already built as many as they could. But really, the reason I'm showing you this is that if you look at the 720 was the same size as the Dash 80. So when the original Dash 80 product came out, this is how big the Dash 80 was about the same size as the 720, the 707 720. 720s are still in the market. You can, if you go on airliners.net, you could probably find. I'll put a link in the description box down below for the 720, and you'll be able to find it down there. But you can go on there. You can type in Boeing 720, and you can still see some flying. It had the turbofans and the JT3s that were flying on them, but it didn't carry as many passengers. There was a lot of crashes. A lot of people did die on this aircraft, though the plane had a very good safety record. The 707s, for as many as there was almost over 1,000 of them built, from the 1950s all the way into 1999, 2000. There were 1,000 of these aircraft built. That's really a lot of numbers for an aircraft that's been in service for almost 4 or 5 decades. So Boeing hit it out of the park. If you look at this plane, something very interesting about it, you're going to notice next week we're going to talk about the 727 and the 737. That'll be our next podcast on this Boeing line here. 737 and the 727. You're going to notice something on the nose. If you look at the nose of these aircraft, this set the precedence of where this aircraft, a lot of the design cues for the 727 and the 737, which we're going to be talking about, you're going to see those design cues show up in those aircraft. I really appreciate you all joining tonight's podcast. I was able to, last week, I'm sorry I was a little befuddled. I was trying to I got this new program in, and I wanted to show you guys, and I'm hoping that you guys really like the new setup and everything like that. This plane was you can see it in museums. I think this is an airplane that you're going to see around flying for another, I don't know. I could see this plane flying around for another 50 years. Maybe longer than that. I mean, look at the Boeing. When this plane was being produced, the 707, the B-52 had just come. Was flying out there already, and the B-52s have been around. There's B-52s that were produced in the 1960s, early 1960s, and they're still flying around today. So, that really does about it about the Boeing 707. What I do want to point out to you guys, I'll be putting out some more content, especially some reviews on some builds. Recently, I just started to build my first flight test XD 3D, and I will put out a video about that shortly when I'm done with the build, and I'm gonna give you my review of it. I'm not really liking the kit too much. It's just not a really, I don't know. I'll put out, keep an eye out. You're gonna see the video show up soon. I'll put out some little cues on some shorts. I just also, real important, you ever get a chance, and you don't have to do it right away, but head over to Patreon. Really, just go over to Patreon. I have a Patreon page, Model Man Frank it is, and join the page. I have some video on there from Sun and Fun, that and some other videos that are from the Model Airplane group that I haven't posted on YouTube yet, and you could go over there and be the first to see that that content on there. I got some pictures on there that I haven't put on YouTube. Um, and I really, really would like to see some of y'all go over to Patreon and, join the page, and you'll be able to see a lot of that content over there. I have ideas in my head about how to bring you guys some cool stuff. And I know you guys are going to really enjoy the. So next week we will talk about the 737, the very first 737, which was the 100 and 200 series. And we will also talk about the 727. One gentleman in particular actually had the 727, and we'll put his name out when we get to that time period, or I'll put out a little hint so y'all can find out who it was who had a 727. He had a 727-100, and I'll give you a hint, just a hint. It used to be parked at LaGuardia Airport. And that's the only hint I'm going to give you. I'll give you some subtle hints as we go into next week. But everybody, it was a pleasure. I am so happy that you all were able to join, and I was able to bring you this podcast, and everything worked out really, really well. I hope you learned something new. Some of the things that I find on this particular subject, especially the one we're going from the Boeing planes into the Boeing jets, pardon me, and we're going into the Boeing jet market, is that the 707 set the precedence for everything that came out after the 1960s. Every jet that came out, the 707 was the very first one. And it set the precedence for every aircraft that has ever been produced since then. So, if you think about it, the Boeing 707 was the granddaddy of them all. What anybody ever says out there, the Boeing 707 and the Dash 80, they were, even though Comet had their plane, de Havilland had their airplane, and they did some commercial success in the very first beginnings before they had so many problems, the 707 solved all that problems. So, everybody, thank you very much for joining tonight's podcast. I hope you're able to join me next time. And again, remember, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, right here, same channel. Now remember, a lot of the stuff that I talked about tonight on the 707, I'll put some links in the description box below where you can find some books and things like that. One of the books I used was actually, I'm going to show you right here, I'm sorry. This book you can find it on eBay. Okay, they don't have this book out anymore, but you can find copies of it on eBay. Some guys are selling it way too much for this book, but you can find it a lot cheaper. This book, I think that the lowest price I've seen him is almost $7 for this book. And this has a lot of information, good information about some of the planes we're going to be talking about. And remember, books are important. They're raw material. It's raw information. And the internet gives you some photos and great photos out there. But if you ever want to build a model or anything like that, there's some really great model kits of the 707 out there. Plastics. You can find them on eBay, and wood aircraft projects out there too. So, with that said, thank you very much, everybody, for joining. And we'll see you next week. Same time, same place, right here on this channel. Model Man Frank out. See you guys later. Have a good night.